name is Scott Crosby. I teach political science on this campus, and I was invited to moderate today's discussion sponsored by the Young Americans for Liberty Club here at Valencia West Campus. Our discussion today will be centered upon the topic of, is capitalism evil? And we're going to follow the format where, after I briefly introduce our two panelists, we're going to have them open with a 3-minute each introduction of themselves and their points of view on this topic. And then we will go with me asking them questions that I've prepared for each, with 3 minutes given to each panelist to respond to my question, and then a rebuttal from the opposing viewpoint for an additional 2 minutes. So we'll go 3 to 2, and then I'll call time each case and move to the next question. The panelists are clear about the rules. Okay. Our panelists today are Professor Jack Chambliss, who teaches economics here on West Campus, and Professor Graham Lindbeck, who teaches biology here on West Campus as well. And I'm going to open with their initial statements, 3 minutes each. We're going to start with Professor Chambliss, and you may start with your opening statement.
Thank all of you for being here. I know many of you have other things that you could be doing, so the fact that you're here speaks well of your interest in learning more about this important topic. I want to thank Professor Lindbeck, who was willing to discuss this in a forum that I think does not happen enough here at Valencia, and I certainly want to appreciate Young Americans for Liberty and Professor Crosby for helping to put this event on as well. In 1848, in his monumental book, The Communist Manifesto, Karl Marx said, "The bourgeois, wherever it has gotten the upper hand, has put an end to all feudal, patriarchal, idyllic relations. It has left remaining no other bond between man and man than naked self-interest, than callous cash payment. Consequently, the bourgeois has stripped of its halo every occupation hitherto honored and looked up to with reverent awe. It has converted the physician, the lawyer, the priest, the poet, the man of science into paid wage laborers. Further, all that is solid melts into air, all that is holy is profane. Capitalism has substituted naked, shameless, direct, brutal exploitation." When you hear that, that sounds certainly extreme, a view of a market system that the United States of America was largely founded upon. On March the 9th, 1776, the book An Inquiry into the Nature and Causes of the Wealth of Nations was published by a professor of moral philosophy named Adam Smith. This book was read by Thomas Jefferson and the Founding Fathers before they created our Constitution, and many of them, by their own admission, were deeply influenced by Smith's view of capitalism, a word that means a system where people are allowed to pursue their self-interest in a peaceful way. By peaceful, it means where you do not kill someone else, steal their property, or violate their pursuit of happiness. And where people are allowed to keep the fruits of their labor, as Jefferson referred to it, or as we call it today, our money or private property. So this system of capitalism that Smith envisioned was one where we look out at what skills we have to offer to the world, whether it's engineering or biology or economics. We make a decision pursuant to our best interests on where to offer those services to the world, with the inherent hope that the world will reward us by saying, we value what you are offering so much that we voluntarily cooperate with you to give you money.
Professor Lindbeck, your 3 minutes.
I'd also like to thank the organisers for the invitation to come and talk. This is not a forum, as Professor Chambliss points out, it is often offered to by the faculty or
Yeah, I think, is your...
This is not a forum that is often offered to faculty members or students to participate in, and it's something that we really do need to have more of, an open discussion of ideas, because that's what education is all about. And that's what we, as professors, are here to pursue, the opportunity to express ideas. I don't necessarily disagree with what Professor Chambers has said. I do not view capitalism to be essentially evil. It's not that capitalism is evil, it's the way it is used that can make it evil. Any system is subject to that sort of manipulation. It doesn't matter where you look. You can find idealistic ideas that have been manipulated and used for nefarious means. Capitalism, as it is, has been described by Professor Chambers, has a lot of ideals. Unfortunately, when it is allowed to run without regulation, which is a general trend that we see around us today, capitalism can become a weapon to be used by those who have to keep down those who have not. And that is the general trend that we see in the world today. That there is a general trend for those that have to accumulate more, and those that do not have to have less at their expense and at the benefit of those who have.
All right, we're going to move now to the question and answer period where I will pose a question to each of you. You will have 3 minutes to answer and then a 2-minute rebuttal for the other panels. The first up is Professor Chambers. Your question is, many textbooks on economics will tell us that the maximization of profit is one of the primary, if not the primary, goal of a firm. Since labor is one of the biggest costs of doing business, isn't this a precondition for the exploitation of labor?
No, it is not. It is true that labor, on average, comprises 70% of the cost of doing business in the United States of America. But the word exploitation is key here. The word exploitation denotes some form of force, coercion, threat, the lack of viable options for participants in an economy. The fact that labor makes up such a large percentage of the cost of doing business in the United States indicates that labor does have a voice. If businesses chose to underpay or exploit labor, we would be looking at labor costing 5 or 10% perhaps, or 2%. Or in the case of slavery, virtually no percent other than enough food to keep people alive. So the fact that Americans every day have choices in where they can live, where they can work, businesses they can move to, jobs they can change to, businesses they can start on their own, is an indication that businesses don't exploit labor. They simply offer wages and salaries for people to consider, and free human beings, looking at what that wage or salary is, decide whether it's pursuant to their self-interest to accept it or not. And if they believe it's not high enough, they move on to their next best choice. If they believe it is, that is called voluntary cooperation, which would suggest exploitation is not taking place. So you being unhappy about what you might make per hour doesn't mean you're exploited. In a free market, in capitalism, it simply means you haven't yet acquired the skill, training, education to offer rarer skills to someone who's willing to pay you more.
Okay, Professor Limbeck-Rigar.
One of the big issues that we have in the current American economy is that the jobs that are available are jobs that are at the lowest possible level of salary. Minimum wage. If you are stuck in a minimum wage job and it is your only option and you have no way of getting out of it, I do not see that as being fair. I do not see that as being equitable. When you do not have options, when you're not offered options, when all you can do is work on a minimum wage, a wage that has to be set by the government in order for the employer to actually give it to you, that's exploitation. However you want to slice it and dice it, that is exploitation right there. The fact that the government has to step in and mandate the minimum wage that can be awarded to someone means that there is the ability for industry to offer less unless they are forced to offer more. I don't know about you, but I would not like to live on minimum wage. I've worked in jobs that paid minimum wage. I didn't last there very long. It is not a comfortable place to be in, and yet a large portion of our workforce are stuck in those sorts of jobs.
Okay, next question for Professor Lindbergh. Given the human rights record of centrally planned economies such as China, Soviet Union, Vietnam, and others, is it really fair to label capitalism as any more exploitive of labor than any other system?
One of the problems with the current crop of centrally planned economies is that none of them are actually following the principles that Marx laid down for a truly Marxist system. There has never been a truly Marxist experiment ever carried out. Marx specifically stated that a Marxist society would be truly equitable. Everyone would have a say. It would be governed from the bottom up, not from the top down. But if you look at every centrally controlled economy, where is the control? It is from the top down, not from the bottom up. So it becomes exploitive not because it is a Marxist economy, but because it has been perverted and has been manipulated and has been misused. This is the problem. When we start to complain about what communism is, when we start to complain about what Marxism is, when we start to complain about centrally manipulated economies, what we're actually complaining about is something that is not Marxism and not socialism.
Professor Chambliss, rebuttal.
The last thing you should ever hope for is to live in a country where things are controlled from the bottom up, because those at the bottom will aspire to take what you have earned and created by force and give it to themselves. Professor Lindbergh is exactly right. We have never seen communism practiced anywhere in the world, and one reason for that is because Karl Marx was a horrible biologist more than anything else. Marx envisioned a utopian society where everyone would willingly give up their self-interest for the betterment of their fellow man. That is biologically impossible. We were all born self-interested. We pursue our self-interest every day. We pick our majors, we pick our industries, we pick our jobs. And the idea of having a society where we're going to somehow all recognize that self-interest is wrong and that we're all equal, we're not all equal. Some people are smarter, harder working, better looking, faster, sing better, study more. Imagine a world where it was run from the top, from the bottom up. We would tell everybody, go to the voting booth, pick out the house you want, pick out the property you want, pick out the income of the CEO you want, and you decide what their pay should be. And as the people at the bottom would vote for those politicians to take from one to give to another, we would end up seeing mass immigration of those people who are creating the wealth, who are creating the jobs, who are creating the opportunities. And in every place, look at the Venezuelan revolution recently. The people were allowed to vote. And Hugo Chavez did what the people said. He took the property, he redistributed wealth, and Venezuelans are now starving. They're in lines. They can't find access to quality health care and food and clothing. And so when you tell people, when you tell the masses, you go vote and we'll run it from bottom up, they will always pick to take from those who are creating to make their lives better.
Professor Chambliss, next question. We see record high profits for major companies with huge payments to CEOs and investors. Yet the average take-home pay for the hourly worker seems to stagnate. Isn't this an obvious sign of the exploitative nature of the capitalist system?
First of all, if we look at, you're absolutely right, median wages have fallen by $4,000 in the United States of America since President Obama took office. President Obama told Joe the plumber that we needed to spread the wealth, that we needed to raise taxes on wealthier individuals, raise capital gains taxes, and he's done that. Taxes have gone up on investment and on income. There's been a dramatic increase, both under the Bush and Obama administration, in regulation of industry. And yet we still see the people at the middle stagnating or going down, and we still see the same levels of poverty as we saw 50 years ago when the war on poverty began. The mistake that we're making here is to look at the profit of Apple and Facebook and Google and say, this represents exploitation, when what we need to look at are the rules and regulations and taxes that are placed on the people that create the jobs and create the opportunities, how it trickles down to the middle class and the poor. We may not like rich people, but we need them. We need them to create the products and the opportunities for all the rest of us to be middle or lower class. And without rich people, that's simply not going to happen. So when they make record profits, all they're doing is serving their fellow man. These phones that you have, they're serving you well, you voluntarily buy them, and they're rewarded for that. It doesn't mean they're exploiting you or the workers. It simply means they're doing something that you inherently approve of. Otherwise, you wouldn't try to work for their companies or you wouldn't buy their products.
So, your 2-minute response.
It's true that the taxes on the wealthy have been raised. It's true that the corporate taxes have been raised too, but it's also very true that the companies that have been taxed and the people who have been taxed have profited greatly under this system. And this is historically also the case. In the Clinton administration, one of the great arguments against what the Clinton administration tried was that they did the same thing, and businesses boomed. There's nothing inherently wrong with taxing the wealthy and taxing corporations if it results in better outcomes for everybody. If there is more wealth to be shared, better social safety nets to be placed in place for the people who have less by taxing corporations, by taxing the wealthy, and they still make a profit and they still do better under that system than they do when the taxes are not there, then what is inherently wrong with that?
For Professor Lindbeck. Doesn't the fact that some workers, such as those who work at Walmart, have the ability to own stock in the company they work for complicate the exploitation of workers argument? After all, workers who own company stock are in a sense working for themselves.
The ability to own stock in the company that you work for does not necessarily mean that you're not being exploited. It gives you the opportunity to own stock. If you have to purchase that stock, you deplete your own ability to support yourself. If you are rewarded that stock as a consequence of your labour, then that's fine. But if you're forced to pay for it, you're paying for it out of the wage that you are being given, and that decreases your lifestyle. I don't see that that's actually a benefit.
Well, it is a benefit to the extent that they do have choice. None of the corporations tell their workers, we're going to force you to buy stock in our company. The corporations make that available to the workers. Many of them in mid-level management jobs actually have stock options that come at a heavy discount for them. And the fact that these workers voluntarily take the money they set aside, if it's coming from their wages, think about what the workers are doing. They're deciding perhaps to improve their own futures by buying stock in the company rather than buying a newer car, or buying a better stereo system or a bigger television for their home. This also is something to celebrate the fact that we do not have, for example, governments telling people, this is the job you have to have, this is where you have to go, you're not allowed to move here or pursue this occupation. That we give workers the freedom at all levels within these companies to express with their hard-earned money what they value. And with respect to the Clinton administration, all of you should do the math. His first 2 years when taxes went up, the economy went sideways. It was his last 6 years when he cut the capital gains tax, cut inheritance taxes, created the Roth IRA, reformed welfare out of force from the Reagan Republicans that were in the House and the Senate. Clinton's last 6 years when he acted like a capitalist, we had the economic boom. It wasn't his first 2 years when he was a tax increaser.
Thank you. Next question is for Professor Chambliss. In capitalist theory, the workers sell their labor. But can the commodification of human labor be rightly called anything other than participation in an exploitative system?
Well, I think the question answers itself when we're saying that the workers have the right to sell their labor. 24 years ago, Valencia was very clear. They said, we would like you to come here and teach, and this is what we are willing to offer you. So they did not purchase me. They purchased a service that I was willing to offer to them. The same would be the case if you offered your services to a company. You don't become an indentured servant. You remain a free agent during the time you're working. If you're working at Starbucks or Walmart or anywhere else, if you feel like there's a better deal across the street, in the middle of a shift, you can tell your employer, I've had it here, I can improve my life going somewhere else. So the fact that we're not indentured servants, and we do have this element of choice, and we do have the freedom to weigh these offers and be geographically mobile, you should look at the history of the world where people don't have this right. I saw a documentary that in 1989 was the first time in Soviet Union history where a worker was allowed to leave the country to go live somewhere else. The first time in its history. And so, again, we should be happy that we can all look at ourselves as free human beings to say, I do not like this offer for my services because I don't believe it's enough money. But at no time does the fact that we agree to that offer make us a slave or indentured or make us exploited, because again, we got to agree or disagree with the terms of the contract. So you couldn't call that exploitation. Even if you're a minimum wage worker, as you indicated, you weren't there very long. You had choice, as I had choice when I left a minimum wage job, as they had choices as well.
Professor Lindbeck, your response?
I inherently disagree with what Professor Chambliss has just said. It is a contract that you enter into when you sell your services and you agree to work for an organisation. Where I find it to be inequitable is where there is no option in terms of employment, and this is where I think we fundamentally disagree. Yes, I have an education. I have choices. I am mobile. But there are a lot of people that don't have those choices, that are born into situations where they're not given that opportunity, will never have that opportunity. Where do we leave them? How do we account for them? It is very difficult to justify the sort of life that we say we want when you go and you take a look in other countries where people are born into squalor, they live in squalor all their life, they have no opportunity to get out of it, they live on the sort of money that, for a year, that we would spend at Starbucks in 3 months. Where is the equity? It makes this whole argument over capitalism versus anything else moot when we are confronted with that, because these are situations that capitalism can't solve. No one can solve. And this is the sort of situation that rampant capitalism feeds on.
Thank you. Next question, Professor Lindbeck. Economists such as John Maynard Keynes and Milton Friedman have argued that capitalism is a necessary requirement for individual liberties. Do you agree with that premise?
It's a question that I think is... I'm going to struggle with this one, because the idea of liberties. I come from a country that is socialist in leaning. Australia has a socialist government, and it has very strong socialist leanings. It has very strong socialist tradition. We also have a lot of liberties. We don't have as free a capitalist society as the society here in America. The degree of regulation on industry in Australia has traditionally been a lot tighter. The labour unions have been a lot stronger. Student unions have been very strong. The idea of providing minimum wage, providing a national health scheme, this is all something that is very traditionally found in Australian economic economic system, and this is something that we're very proud of. But we're also very proud of our liberties and our ability to live a life that we choose. And so in that sense, I'm not sure, it depends on what Keynes and how you want to interpret Keynes and Friedman in saying capitalism. Do you mean capitalism with a big C, rampant capitalism, free markets, laissez-faire attitude, or do you mean capitalism with a small c, where there is a ownership of private ownership of business, but some government regulation to keep things in check, where there is social safety nets? In that sense, if it's capitalism with a small c, then I would agree. If it's capitalism with a big C, I would tend to lean towards the negative.
Professor Chambers, will respond.
First of all, I'm inclined to beg you, as soon as this debate is over, to go to your phones, go to the internet, and type in Heritage Foundation rankings of economic freedom. Number one, Australia now is one of only 5 economically free nations in the world. It's ranked in the top 5. The United States ranks 12th. I don't know how long it's been since you've been in Australia, but things have changed significantly there with respect to economic freedom. Regulations have been reduced, private property rights have been increased, taxes have fallen dramatically compared to what goes on in the United States of America. Australia is freer than we are at this point in time. That said, if you look at when Professor Limbeck talks about around the world what people live on, go to these rankings and look at what's going on in much of Africa, Asia, South America. It's precisely the places that don't practice capitalism where you see rampant poverty. Everywhere in the world, Hong Kong, Singapore, New Zealand, Australia, Estonia now, everywhere you see largely free markets where most of the regulations are such that if you lie, cheat, steal, we've got 2 systems to deal with you. Number 1, the customer's going to stop coming into your business and you're going to go out of business. Number 2, we've got the courts to deal with you. That's the regulations most of these countries adhere to. But if you look at the places that don't practice capitalism, they're suffering and dying because the government controls people's lives. Too much tax, too much regulation. Most African countries where private property is illegal. It's in precisely the places that practice capitalism with the big C, allowing people to be free, allowing people to own property, taxing them little, regulating them little. That's where we see prosperity abound, including in Australia more now than the United States of America.
And
Yeah, go to the rankings and look at it for yourself.